So let's have a serious conversation about Halloween, because Halloween was never supposed to be mainstream. It was never supposed to be about candy or dressing up your kids in a costume or carving pumpkins with your friends and your family. When Halloween was first created, it was literally a death festival called Samhain. And Samhain dates all the way back to the medieval times, specifically in Europe and specifically even more within the Celtic communities. The Celtic people during this day and age believed that this time of year, late October to early November, was very, very sacred. They believed that this was the one time of year where the spirits of their dead relatives and dead people of the past could easily enter into the real world and live among us for a few days. And this was a massive festival. This was multiple days where they would get drunk, have a huge feast, and most importantly, worship, idolize, and make burnt sacrifices to these dead spirits. The reason why they made sacrifices to these dead spirits was because they believed that during this time, these spirits would tell them what would happen in the future. And this was very important because it was about to be winter. It was about to be cold. It was about to be very, very dark. And they needed to have a way to survive the up and coming season. And by making sacrifices to these dead spirits, they believed that they would receive information that would help them survive this season. So how did Samhain eventually turn into a multi-billion-dollar industry centered around candy, costumes, and sadly enough, children? And as a Christian and a follower of Jesus, should you be celebrating Halloween? So before I answer that question, let me just give you the actual full history of how Halloween became Halloween, because a lot of us, we just do what we're told to do. We don't actually question why we do what we do. If someone tells us to put on a costume and take our kids trick-or-treating and, do this and carve pumpkins and whatever, we just do it. And we never actually question why we are doing it. And I think that's a problem. I think that's a massive problem. So let me really break this down for you and show you where Halloween came from. Like we said, it all started in medieval Europe as a Celtic holiday. And this was not just one day. It was multiple days. Sometimes it started as early as October 25th and it went all the way through like November 5th or November 6th. And it was a time that was actually mandated. So if you were a Celtic person, you had to be at this festival. You had to. Otherwise, they could quite possibly execute you for not showing up to this festival. This is how sacred and important it was. And you got to understand these people. They were pagan people. They were not people who, followed Jesus or followed one God. They followed multiple gods. They had multiple different beliefs. And a lot of them believed that this time of year, the spirits of dead people would walk among them. And this was a massive celebration. They would get drunk. They would have massive feasts and they would worship these spirits. They would idolize these spirits. They would build altars for these spirits. They would make sacrifices to these spirits. Now, I don't know how deep the sacrifices got. I know it was cattle. I know it was things of that nature. I don't know if it actually got to a human standpoint. It might have, but I don't know. The fact of the matter is this is a very dark and demonic time of year at its earliest beginnings. And the reason why this was such a sacred time is because the priests during this time period, this medieval time period, they believed that the dead spirits who would come into this, world during this season would give them actual prophecy. And a prophecy, for those of you who do not know, it's just a foretelling of things that are going to happen. And we have to understand the time period. The Celtic people, obviously, they didn't have heat. They didn't have, indoor appliances. They didn't have, access to proper ways of storing their food, but also staying warm during the winter. So a lot of them during this time period, they would face famine. They would, pass away due to being, so cold and freezing to death. So it was very important to them to receive prophecy in order to help them survive this up and coming cold winter. Very important. But something very interesting happened, and this takes us to the next step in the timeline to understanding how Samhain, this death festival, turned into Halloween as we know it today. Something very interesting happened. The Roman invasion happened, and the Romans conquered a specific part of Europe where the Celtic people resided. And when the Romans conquered the Celtic people, they wanted them to convert to their religion, which was Catholic. These were Roman Catholic people who invaded, who conquered the Celtic people. And that's where a lot of people get confused, because a lot of people say, well, isn't Halloween a Christian holiday? The reason why Halloween is known to be a Christian holiday is because it was appropriated by the Roman Catholics in order to be that. And the reason why they made Samhain, this death festival, into a Christian holiday is because they wanted to convert the Celtic people into Catholicism. And the way that they did that was by allowing them to keep the same core elements of the death festival, Samhain, but instead of worshiping, dead spirits and dead family members, now the Roman Catholics wanted them to worship the Christian martyrs. So Christian martyrs are anybody who has been killed as a result of believing in Jesus, as a result of, proclaiming their faith in Jesus. So all of these people who were killed because they believed in Jesus were now honored on this same time of year, which was originally created to be a death festival, a very dark and demonic death festival. All right. So I hope you're following along with what I'm saying. And this is how we get to the point of All Saints Day or All Hallows Day. So now we have the Celtic people who are now under the control of the Roman Catholics and are forced to convert to the same religion as the Roman Catholics and be Catholics. So now they can no longer worship the dead spirits that they used to worship in their pagan religion. And now they are going to worship the Christian martyrs. All right. The next step in the timeline is how Halloween evolved from All Saints Day or All Hallows Day, because a lot of people call All Saints Day All Hallows Day. It's virtually the same thing. It's the same term. They're essentially interchangeable. It's the same tradition. All Hallows Day transformed into Halloween as we know it. And Halloween is basically just a more secular version of All Hallows Day, meaning the people who were not religious, they looked at All Hallows Day and they wanted to be involved. They liked the celebration, they wanted to have a good time as well, but they didn't necessarily want the religious aspect of it. So they turned it into a secular version and called it Halloween. And that's ultimately how we got to Halloween as we know it today. But here's something that is very, very concerning that we all need to understand. Samhain is obviously the original Halloween. Samhain is the pagan death festival. Samhain is the time of year where people believe that spirits of the dead would walk among us and they would worship these spirits. Samhain is still very much celebrated even today. So much so that Samhain is a major Wicca and Wiccan holiday, one of the 8 major holidays that witches celebrate, that Wiccans celebrate, even still to this day. To this day. And I want to show you something that I found on TikTok, because if you do a search on TikTok, you'll find a lot of videos about Samhain, and you'll find how important it still is to these pagan people even today. And I want to show you a couple of videos in particular just to kind of paint the picture of how much these people still worship Samhain, which is what we know today as Halloween. Check this out.
Everybody's favorite holiday is fast approaching, and that is Halloween. But what a lot of people don't know is that not only is it Halloween, but it also shares the same night as a high holiday for the witch community known as Samhain. So if you've seen this spelled before, a lot of people think it's pronounced Samhain, but it's actually in Ireland pronounced Sow-in. In Wales, it's Sow-in, and in Scotland, it's pronounced Samhain. And this is a Celtic holiday, and it is the Celtic New Year, and it is also the witches' New Year. We use this night in this time of year in order to connect with our ancestors, because we believe that the veil is thinnest between worlds for those that are here and those who have shifted. So we use this time to connect with our ancestors, those that have passed on, and to reflect on the lessons that they have taught us, the lessons that we've learned during the year, and holding on to those lessons and releasing what no longer serves us. So with your holiday celebrations this year, and along with getting candy and going to great parties, also take the time to say thank you to your ancestors, to the people that have taught you the valuable lessons throughout your lineage, and to also take the time to release the things that you realized no longer serve you. And that we do in celebration of those who've walked before us, and as a thank you to them as well, and setting the stage and creating the legacy for those yet to come. So happy Halloween, and absolutely happy Samhain.
It's almost Samhain. It's perfect time to build an ancestor altar. If you haven't had one before, let me help you out. This is the surface we're going to use. This isn't actually my altar, but this is going to be a makeshift one. We're going to keep this super simple for anyone to recreate. First off, cleanse your surface of your altar. I like using Florida water. I'm also going to be using smoke. My ancestors really, really love Florida water. Hopefully this doesn't mess up the wood. Next up, put a white altar cloth down. And this is where you bring your ancestors. Get yourself a white candle, a glass of water, clean, and your divination. You could stop here. Simple, simple ancestor altar. Now, if you have a little bit of extra tools, let me show you what you can also do. If you have any pictures of your ancestors, put them on your altar. Only pictures of deceased and past loved ones should go on your altar. Here's my great-great-grandma Day. It is customary to put flowers on your ancestor altar. These are from my other altar, so they're not fresh, but get yourself some fresh flowers and place them down. This is the perfect color for, next up is some sort of offering glass for coffee, alcohol, anything like that. At this point, if you have anything personal, add it to your altar. This is my ancestor's bell. My mom gave it to me. It's an heirloom. Anything personal for your family, put it on the altar. Next up, you're going to want something for offerings. Get yourself a dish and place anything that you feel they would love. Anything that you really like, they'll start telling you what you need. You'll get random cravings. Listen to them. I personally like having 2 dishes. This is just kind of for like the crystals, anything that I'm just giving them, and then a food dish. This would be for their food offerings. Overview of this simple altar so far. So now that we got the most important, the water, the candle, we have a picture of them. Obviously, you can stop here or you can adorn it farther. For me, the most important part of an ancestor altar is that it works. Sit down, spend time with your ancestors, drink your favorite drink, drink their favorite drink. Tell them about your day and start working. They'll listen to you, they'll be there for you. Next question is, where do we put our ancestor altars? This will vary because a lot of people say don't put them in your room, don't put them in your room. But as a kid and growing up, I didn't have another option. I had a dorm room, like it was the only room I had. My ancestors didn't mind. If you have a conversation with them and they don't like being in your bedroom because of activities, move them elsewhere. But they're your ancestors. In my mind, they didn't ever mind being in my room. Happy venerating.
So when I first watched these 2 videos that you just watched, these 2 TikTok videos, I literally got nauseous. Like I literally got nauseous and became like physically sick. And because I'll be honest, last year I did celebrate Halloween, and this was before I knew what I know about Halloween now. And this was before I was this far on my walk with God. Quite frankly, I was asleep. I didn't know any better. And to see how sacred and holy this holiday is to these people who practice these pagan religions really opened my eyes to the fact that I don't know if there's an innocent way for us to participate in Halloween without accidentally practicing paganism. I don't know if there's a way for Christians to participate in this holiday and not have some sort of seed planted in their spirit or planted in their children's spirit, because this is a time of year where, like I said, it's one of 8 major Wiccan holidays. This is something that is not to be taken lightly. It's not to be taken lightly. So I want to pivot a little bit and just kind of look at some of the core elements of Halloween as we know it, specifically trick-or-treating and costumes. And I want to actually show you where these things came from, because much like the beginning of this conversation that we had, a lot of the times we just do stuff and we don't know why we're doing it. Somebody tells us to put our kids in a costume and have them go to a random stranger's house. and ask for candy. And we do it. And we never question why. Why are we doing this? Who said it was okay for us to do this? And I want to show you where these things came from. So let's take a deeper look at trick-or-treating, because trick-or-treating was first for poor children in medieval Europe who would go door to door begging for food and money during the Celtic holiday Samhain. In exchange, they would offer to pray for the souls of their neighbors' recently departed loved ones. This tradition was called Sow-in. This tradition of trick-or-treating that we know today was very first, when it was first created originally, it was called Sow-in, as a way for the community, through the use of children largely, to pray for the loved ones of the family members of the community, in hopes that they would make it to heaven through the prayers of their community. But this is largely happening through children, which is very weird, very demonic, very, very just pagan. I don't know how to explain it. It's very pagan, but now we try to take that same ancient tradition, which was very specific, very dark, and we try to flip that into being about candy, which makes no sense. It makes completely no sense to me. As Halloween progressed, because remember, the Roman Catholics took over Samhain, and they turned it into All Saints' Day or All Hallows' Eve. As it started to progress, trick-or-treaters got a little more adventurous. Instead of just promising prayer, they started singing jokes, telling jokes, or staging doorstep performances for their treats. The tradition became known as mumming. So now we have, I don't agree. It's not more adventurous. This is not my writing, but I think praying for somebody's family member is more adventurous, thinking that your prayer is going to help them get into heaven. Like our prayers is not going to help you get into heaven. You need to know Jesus on your own. You need to have your own salvation worked out with fear and trembling. So, but this is an era where we start to see Halloween kind of become more mainstream, right? And also something really weird that happened during this time period is single women would perform tricks of their own on All Hallows Eve in hopes that they would discover the identities of their future husbands and ideally be married by the following year. It's really weird. Did you know that? Really weird. Another interesting thing about trick-or-treating, candy was not actually introduced until about the 1920s. But the neighbors did hand out a round pastry to children called a soul cake. A soul cake. And these are still being made today. If you go trick-or-treating and you see like a little round cake that your neighbors hand out, don't take those cakes. Don't take those cakes. Those are soul cakes. Those cakes are made with a very specific intention. And a lot of the times, these people are putting spells over those cakes in order to serve a very specific purpose in the spiritual realm. And it's very demonic and it's very dark. And it all ties back to the idea of trying to make sure that the souls of our dead relatives make it to heaven through our community prayer. It's all rooted in that same idea. All right. Something that is also very interesting, because y'all don't believe me when I say how pagan Halloween actually is. The 19th century also introduced the offering of nuts and fruits to trick-or-treaters, especially apples. Have y'all ever wondered, like, why do we bob for apples? Why was bobbing for apples ever a thing? It's very, very intentional. It's very intentional. It all started in the ancient Roman harvest festival of Pomona, named after the goddess of fruitful abundance. Pomona was associated with apples, and apples were in turn considered a symbol of love and fertility. The significance of this fruit likely evolved into the modern day Halloween tradition of bobbing for apples. So why do we bob for apples? Why do your neighbors give your children apples instead of candy? It all comes from the worship of a pagan god named Pomona. The apple represents Pomona because Pomona was thought to be fruitful abundance. And when your neighbors give your children apples, it's because they are trying to give them a blessing from the god Pomona and bring fruitful abundance to their life. Very demonic, very pagan. When we're bobbing for apples, and I don't know if anyone even bobs for apples anymore, but if you still bob for apples, if you get an apple when you're bobbing for apples, it is said that you will receive a blessing from the goddess Pomona of fruitful abundance. This is all very intentional. We don't just do things because we just made it up. No, they have origins. This is what I'm trying to get y'all to understand. Everything that we do is very intentional, and we have to be aware of it so that we cannot fall into these pagan traditions. Now, let's talk about costumes, and this is so important. I literally almost forgot this. I was sitting down editing this video, and I realized that I did not talk about costumes. This is so important because this is another one of those traditions that we as a society, we just do it. Somebody told us to put our kids in a costume, and we just put them in a costume, but we never really understood why this practice of guising, which is what it was first called, even started. So back in the Sow-in festival, the death festival, remember what I told you. Spirits would enter into the land of the living and walk among people. So they believed. For the most part, according to, the Celtic people, most of these spirits were friendly. They didn't want to harm anybody. But every so now and again, there were a few spirits that had ill intention and that did want to harm and kill people. And because of this reason, they started to do what is called guising or disguising themselves. So what they would do is they would take ash from the fire and they would smear the ash on their face in order to make themselves appear to be something that they weren't, in order to try to blend in with these spirits, because the intention was, if your face was disguised, then the evil spirits who crossed over on Samhain wouldn't be able to recognize you as a human, or if you were just like another one of a spirit like them. So that way it would lessen the chance of you being harmed by the evil spirits. And this is why we wear costumes. This is why we wear costumes, so that we can try and blend in with these evil spirits so that they will not harm us. This is the origins of costumes. It's not just that we just put on a costume and it's just all fun and games. No, we're actively participating in ancient pagan rituals. Actively. It's not just innocent. People think it's just innocent because a lot of people ask me as Christians, okay, well, what if I just put my children in a costume, like something that's innocent, something like a superhero, for example, something that's not, necessarily evil or demonic. How do you feel about that? And to be honest with y'all, and this is just me talking, like I'm taking the approach of, if y'all were my Christian friends, what would I say to you if you came to me with this question? I would tell you, hey, it's still the same thing though, really. It still holds the essence of why they did it in the first place. It may not be the same intent on your side, which is what we're going to talk about. We'll get into that as I dive into scripture. It might not be the same intent for you, but you're still standing firm on those ancient pagan traditions by dressing your kid up in a costume, because you're still participating in what was called guising or disguising yourself so that the spirits couldn't recognize you and figure out if you were human or if you were actual, a spirit like them. So look, it's your call. Use your own discernment when it comes to costumes. I know that not all costumes are demonic and evil and stuff like that. Use your own discernment. But once again, I want to let you know why we do what we do. This is why we wear costumes. This is where it came from. All right. Now we have something very interesting that starts to happen as we shift into the present day. And specifically, let's talk about Halloween as we know it today. Candy companies make an estimate of $2.6 to $3 billion every single month in October. That's crazy. Costume companies make about the same. So we're talking about a multi-billion-dollar industry centered around dead spirits, idolatry, possible sacrifice, both animal and possibly human, worshiping of spirits and depending on them for prophecy, worshiping of pagan gods, depending on prayer for the chance for our neighbors, relatives to enter into heaven. And now we have the addition, if that wasn't a foundation, a demonic foundation enough, now we have the addition of candy. And this might be where I'm going left, and you might think this whole video is going left, right? But with candy specifically, if you think about a food that is representative of death, it's definitely candy. Candy, if you give a child too much candy, they will not live for very long because we know what we need in order to survive. We know we need a healthy balance of protein, of balanced carbohydrates, of fruits, of vegetables. We know we need a healthy balance. So now we have candy companies who are literally profiting billions of dollars in one single month off the consumption, the large consumption of sugar from children during this time of year. In addition, we have people who are spending billions of dollars on costumes. I find it funny that people will make fun of us and try to make us feel stupid for tithing to our local church, but yet they'll spend billions of dollars on candy and costumes during Halloween. You're tithing to the dark side. You're tithing to the demonic side when you're participating in Halloween. So don't get upset with us because we're tithing to our local churches. It is what it is. Y'all gonna believe it or not, but it is what it is. It's a cycle of idolatry. It's a cycle of idolatry. And I really do believe that, I'm going to get into some scripture in a second, but I really do believe that this cycle of idolatry, it needs to end with us. Especially now, there is such a commercialization of paganism, of New Age, especially within our children. I think as Christians, we got to take a stand and we got to say, hey, we can't celebrate Halloween because it was never ours to begin with. It was never intended for us to be involved to begin with. Halloween was hijacked by the Roman Catholics as an appropriation to get the Celtic people to convert to being Catholic, but it was never intended for us. It never was. It never was. But let me get into some scripture and let me really break this down for y'all and go to Exodus 34, verse 12. This is the Israelites during the Old Testament, obviously, and they're about to enter into a new land. And verse 12 says, "Be very careful never to make a treaty with the people who live in the land where you are going. If you do, you will follow their evil ways and be trapped." It's interesting because the Israelites were going into a new land, to conquer a new land, much like the Roman Catholics went into this new Celtic land and conquered this new Celtic land. And it says, be very careful never to make a treaty with the people who live in the land. It's almost like the Roman Catholics did in fact make a treaty with the Celtic people that lived in that land. And that treaty was, hey, we'll compromise. We'll still allow you to celebrate Halloween, but we're going to change the meaning of it, but we'll keep the same foundation of it in essence so that you feel more comfortable converting to being Catholic. It's very interesting. It says, if you do, you will follow their evil ways and become trapped. If you do make a compromise, you will follow their evil ways and become trapped. Instead, you must break down their pagan altars, smash their sacred pillars. You must worship no other gods, for the Lord, whose very name is jealous, is a God who is jealous about his relationship with you. You must not make a treaty of any kind with the people living in the land. They lust after their gods, offering sacrifices to them. I mean, Exodus gives us the clear instruction on what should have happened when the Romans invaded. It was very clear, according to the Bible. If you believe in the Bible, which I'm assuming many of you do if you're watching this, it's very clear what Exodus commanded us to do during this time period. Smash the sacred pillars. Break down their pagan altars. Don't compromise. Don't make a treaty with these people just because you want them to be converted to being Catholic. Don't make a treaty with them, because that their evil and wicked ways will in some way, shape, or form rub off on you. And we're still to this day seeing the effects of that. We're still seeing the effects of that. Still. But check this out, because a lot of y'all will say, oh, okay, well, that's Old Testament. Well, let me read something in the New Testament for you. This is for 1 Corinthians chapter 10. Specifically, this is Paul, and he's talking about this very same time period in Exodus that I just read. So this is where the Old Testament meets the New Testament. And Paul is saying, I don't want you to forget, dear brothers and sisters. So 1 Corinthians 10, verse 1. I don't want you to forget, dear brothers and sisters, about our ancestors in the wilderness long ago. All of them were guided by a cloud that moved ahead of them, and all of them walked through the sea on dry ground. In the cloud and in the sea, all of them were baptized as followers of Moses. All of them ate the same spiritual food, and all of them drank the same spiritual water, for they drank from the spiritual rock that traveled with them, and that rock was Christ. Yet God was not pleased with most of them, and their bodies were scattered in the wilderness. He's saying that, hey, these people, they were following God. God was leading these people that we just spoke about. God was leading these people. They were following God, but God was not pleased with all of them. God was not pleased with all of them. All right. It said, these things happen, verse 6, these things happen as a warning to us so that we would not crave evil things or worship idols as some of them did. As the scriptures say, the people celebrated with feasting and drinking, and they indulged in pagan revelry. What is Samhain originally? Samhain originally, it was a huge festival where they would get drunk for multiple days and they would have a huge feast. By definition, Samhain is pagan revelry. Revelry is tradition. Revelry is festivals. Samhain is, by definition, pagan revelry that we are still participating in today. We are still participating in it today. Verse 14, it says, so my dear friends, flee from the worship of idols. You are reasonable people. Decide for yourselves if what I am saying is true. When we bless the cups, when we bless the cup at the Lord's table, aren't we sharing in the blood of Christ? And when we break bread, aren't we sharing in the body of Christ? Hold on, let me go past that part. What am I trying to say? Am I saying that food offered to idols has some significance, or that idols are real gods? No, not at all. Not at all. Just because, like I said, this is still a very sacred time to these people who practice these pagan religions. But am I saying that, like Paul is saying, that these idols are real gods? No, they're not real gods. There's only one God. Jesus is God. We only serve one, and he is defeated all of this. He is more powerful than all of this, right? But like the verse says, I am saying that these sacrifices are offered to demons and not to God. This holiday, Halloween, it's not made to glorify God whatsoever. It's made to glorify literal demons. This holiday was made for demons, to worship demons, because think about it like this. The Celtic people who first started Samhain, they believed that dead spirits were coming over and walking among them. Let me ask you a question. What dead person do you know that is actually in heaven? And this is a weird question, right? But just bear with me. If somebody passed away and went to heaven, do you really think they would come back down here to earth? No, they're chilling in heaven. So what spirits are coming over and walking among us? Demons. Spirits of people who are not in heaven, spirits of people who are not, in the place that they need to be. So we're worshiping demons during this time period. This whole foundation of Halloween is built on the fact that they were worshiping demons. They were worshiping demons. And I don't want you to participate with demons, Paul says. You cannot drink from the cup of the Lord and from the cup of demons too. You cannot eat at the Lord's table and at the table of demons do. What? Do we dare to rouse the Lord's jealousy? It's funny that he says that, because in Exodus that we read, it says, don't you know that the Lord is a jealous God? And now Paul is referring to that same fact. Do we dare to rouse the Lord's jealousy? But here's the thing. And this is the whole point. Verse 31. It says, so whether you eat or drink or whatever you do, if you're a Christian, if you want to celebrate Halloween, whatever you do, do it all for the glory of God. Do it all for the glory of God. I too try to please everyone in everything that I do. You might feel like you have to celebrate on Halloween because your family is celebrating Halloween. Your friends are celebrating Halloween, and they're pressuring you to come out and celebrate as well. But listen to this. Paul says, I too try to please everyone. We try to please everyone, right? I don't just do what is best for me, though. I do what is best for others so that they may be saved. And you should imitate me just as I imitate Christ. So here's the thing. I am not celebrating Halloween. They can have that. They can have this. This is a Wiccan's major holiday, one of 8. They can have it. I don't want it. I want nothing to do with it. Y'all can keep that. Y'all can keep that. Y'all can keep that. Because here's the thing. There's no way around it. It's demonic. No matter how you try to frame it, it's demonic. The foundation is demonic. No matter how you try to frame that. As Christians, we try to redeem everything. We are so wanting to redeem everything. We have this redemption complex. Like we can turn darkness into light. Listen, we don't need to redeem everything. Let Halloween be a time for these pagan believers to worship their pagan gods. And let us worship the one and true God. But once again, if you want to do it, whatever you do, because you can do whatever you want, but whatever you do it for the glory of God. And do it so that many people can be saved. If you can celebrate Halloween and you can do it for the glory of God, then all power to you. Go ahead and do it. I'm not judging you. If you can celebrate Halloween and you can bring more people to be closer to being saved, then do it. I'm not judging you. All power to you. But I'm saying for me, it doesn't sit well with my spirit, especially knowing what I know about Halloween. It just doesn't sit well with my spirit. Well, you can do whatever you want. And Paul even says this. You can do whatever you want, but not everything is beneficial. Not everything is beneficial. It's not. So the most important thing I want y'all to do with this video is share it. I know this is a long video, but we had to take some time to unpack the lies of the enemy so that you understand what is really going on with Halloween. Share this with another believer. Share this with a non-believer so that they know what they're celebrating. Because I don't want us to just go around just doing what, other people tell us just because it's a tradition, just because we've always done it. But hey, ask your pastor. Don't just watch this video. Ask your pastor, do your own research, watch other videos. But share this one because I want people to actually have their eyes open and spark a conversation and a desire to know more about Halloween. All right? Like this video. I'm out.